Ready to boost your video creations? Try Maxon Studio. Maxon Studio's got your back with a sleek dashboard that's like your own personal editing playground. We're talking dynamic capsules galore. Our capsules are designed to supercharge your content creation game inside After Effects. So say goodbye to staring at a blank screen wondering where to start. Maxon Studio hooks you up with pre-designed, customizable elements. The collection is always growing, from elegant motion graphics to seamless transitions, animated titles, and amazing effects. The best part is, you don't need to be a design wizard or spend hours tweaking every little detail, because user-friendly controls make it easy to tweak text, colors, and more to match your vibe. So, what are you waiting for? Start creating breathtaking videos today with Maxon Studio. Take it for a spin with our free 14-day trial. Level up your content now.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Creative Maxon. My name's Ellie. I'm a trainer at Maxon, and I'm joined for the third and hopefully not final time with Jess. How's it going?
Hello.
Jess?
Hello. How are we doing?
Doing good. Doing good. So we were just chatting about how this has kind of gone so quickly, this whole series. I can't believe we're on the final one already.
I know, it's so sad. Can't believe it.
Can't believe it. But you know, we'll make it a good one for the final one.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to dive in. I think everybody's going to love this one. I mean, they're going to enjoy it all, but I'm sure this one will be a blast.
I mean, I'm especially looking forward to this one. Like you said, the first two have been amazing, but yeah, to get into kind of spongy, fuzzy, hairy materials, yeah, it's going to be a good one. So before I hand over to you, before we get into it, let me do some quick housekeeping. So let me just quickly share this page. This is our lovely little landing page for our live streams. So let me throw that in the chat for you guys. And this is basically just a way of us saying thanks for joining our live streams and some useful links that you might want just to see, you know, what's going on and to catch up on things that are happening in the Maxon world. So first of all, that first link is to our Maxon events page. And here you can see all of the live streams, including in-person events that we have going on at Maxon. So of course, we have the amazing Creative Maxon Beautiful Texturing Part 3, which is today. And then we have a special Ask the Trainer and of course, VFX and Chill with Seth and Hashi. And also, I'm going to do a little shameless plug. I was going to wait till the end, but I mean, we're here now, so why not?
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
actually running, I'm running a brand new Cinema 4D Fundamentals workshop, and this starts next week, and it's going to be over 2 different time zones, well, loads of different time zones, really. If I actually click it, we can see all the different time zones along here, and it's going to be Monday to Friday next week, so the 25th to the 29th of November, and it's basically a beginner's workshop. So if you're like interested in getting into 3D or learning Cinema 4D or learning Redshift, or you want to kind of brush up on some tips and tricks and techniques, then I would seriously recommend that. And it's going to be on YouTube Live, and I'll be there in the chat mentoring with you. So yeah, I wanted to do a little shameless plug for that because yeah, I finished that off today.
I love it. It's so exciting, and I'm sure everyone's going to love that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It should be a good one. Also, just a reminder, as you can see, we are currently streaming on YouTube. So we're streaming on the Maxon YouTube channels and the Maxon training team. And these are actually recorded. So these streams get recorded, they get timestamped, thanks to Dr. Sassy. So shout out Dr. Sassy. And they get uploaded onto the Maxon training team YouTube channel. So if you ever want to rewatch something, for example, part 1 and part 2 of this series, you can go back onto the Maxon training team and they're all on there for you, along with all the other live streams, loads of quick tips, loads of tutorials. So you have no excuse not learning Cinema 4D and Redshift, and all the other tools. So ZBrush, Red Giant, and Forger as well. Also, we have a lovely educational platform here, which is called Cineversity. So we also have a whole bunch of content on here that you also can't actually find on the training team. So for example, all the Getting Started series of all of our tools, including new features like particles, can actually be found on Cineversity. So definitely check that out as well. And then finally, as a thank you for being part of our lovely live streams, we love to give away t-shirts. So you can grab one of these Maxon t-shirts. If you enter the secret password, which is beautiful textures, again, let me throw this in the chat. You can unlock this lovely merch store here, and then you will only have to pay for shipping. So it will vary depending on where you're from, but basically you can grab yourselves a t-shirt and represent along with us. So, Jess, I want to shout out your Instagram and also your YouTube channel.
Aww.
So a little bit about Jess. She's an amazing 3D artist, as you may have already seen over the last kind of couple of weeks. And she actually created some great content for our new release video, which then led to her, guesting on this series, which has been so amazing. And I'm gutted it's going to be over after this one.
Me too.
Hopefully could do some more. So yeah, I just wanted to shout out your Instagram here to check out her amazing work. And also you do tutorials, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a beautiful channel here for you if you want some more content to dive into.
Yes. So this is great. Yeah. So I wanted to shout this out as well because some amazing tutorials on here. So yeah, a lot of people have been saying that they're going to miss you and they've loved having you on here.
Aww.
So you don't have to miss her too much because she has, it's this way, she has her own YouTube channel. So yeah, definitely check those out as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I love it. If anybody has requests ever too, you can let me know. I'll make some content.
Perfect. All right, cool. So are we ready to get started?
We are ready.
Final part.
I think
Brilliant.
so. Let me switch over to...
Yeah, let me ping your screen over. Also, hey to everyone in the chat. So hey to Artificial, to Sharon, to Puneet, Ivan, Thomas, Totes. Yeah, hey to everyone in the chat. As a reminder, feel free to use the chat to ask me or Jess any questions that you want, or to share some great stuff, information that you know and you've learned. Yeah, feel free to throw that all in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those questions.
Absolutely. All right, we're ready to dive in?
We are ready to go.
Cool. So I'm going to first just show kind of a picture of what we are going to be kind of creating today. And I don't have any animation, but I'll just show you the photo of some of my kind of tests. And this is actually the same kind of thing that you will see in the downloadable file. So we do have a project file for this one that you can download. And so we're going to be creating some abstract forms with a procedural sponge material. And then we're also going to be adding some fuzz or fluff, whatever you want to call this. So really fun mixture of just shapes and also textures. Just make something really tactile and fun. So I hope you guys are excited and we can dive right on into getting started. So for the first portion of this, we're just going to be focusing on creating our actual abstract shape. And the way I'm going to do that is by starting with a sphere. And this we can rename to our sphere base. And I'm actually going to be creating some other random shapes and just cloning those into the volume of our sphere to start. So we can just start by grabbing in some other shapes. I'm going to pull in some cylinders and just maybe make one of these kind of tall and thin. And then I'll grab another cylinder and we can just leave it at the default. Maybe I'll grab a torus and kind of shrink this down by pressing T and scaling it. And it's okay if we're not seeing them fully right now. I'm just kind of pulling these into our scene. So I'll grab another torus and maybe make this wider and thinner. And maybe we want like one more sphere that's kind of small, and we'll just pull it out here so we can see it. So these are going to be the shapes that we're going to actually clone into our sphere base. So we can just pull in a cloner right now to start, and we can highlight all those shapes again and pull those into the cloner. And by default, the cloner is set to grid mode, so it's going to scatter those on a grid. And we don't want that. We want this to be in object mode. And now we can actually pull our sphere base into the object section here, and it will start scattering those throughout our sphere. And it actually puts those on the surface, but I actually want to put this in the volume. This is totally up to you. I do think you get something really interesting by scattering these on the surface of your shape. So if you want to create an abstract form this way, that's totally up to you. But I'm going to change this to volume. And it will stack things vertically, which is interesting, but not really the look that I'm going for. So I'm actually going to offset these by using a random field to kind of control the rotation. So I'm going to go into the field section here, and I'm going to grab the random field. And it's going to enable the position by default. And I'm just going to uncheck that for now because I want to focus on rotation first. And this value is just going to turn these in the H value, which doesn't do a whole lot. So I'm mainly focusing here on controlling the P rotation and the B rotation. So this is where you can have a lot of fun with just rotating them however you'd like. I'm going to set these values to 360 and 360, just so I know I get a ton of variety in how my shapes are rotating. And then to make sure that I've got a bunch of rotation on each object, I'm actually going to change the random mode to noise and set the scale really small, maybe almost just to 1, so that it's kind of hard to explain. But if you're visualizing that noise in 3D space, it's going to be so small that it's probably going to be affecting each of these shapes individually instead of like a large noise where you'd see that gradual rotation. So we can go back to our cloner now, and it's set to volume, and we can now play with like the amount of clones we have. We can play with the seed, and this will give us something completely different for whatever shape we want to go for. So we can keep playing around until we get something that we like. So I think this is kind of interesting. Maybe we want to keep clicking through. This is just totally like you playing around until you find a form that you like. So I might actually go back to that one we had here. I think that's interesting with the way that toruses are kind of laid out right now. So let's just say that this is kind of the base form that I want to start with. There's a couple things that I want to do to actually change the harshness of where all these shapes are meeting. And also I kind of want to smooth out harsh edges. So I'm going to throw this into a volume builder. So we can just add our volume builder here and a volume mesher. We can connect those two, putting the builder into the mesher. And then I'm going to drag both my cloner and the sphere base that we made into that volume builder because I want the sphere to be a part of the shape. So if we just drag those in, you're going to see that volume builder at work, but the voxel size is too high right now. It's set to 10 centimeters. So I'm actually going to change this to 3 to start, and we might need to lower that value in a little bit. But we can also drag in the SDF smooth, and that will just clean up any of those harsh kind of ridges you might be seeing in our shape. And let me actually turn off our work plane so that's not kind of in the way. But you see like this almost box grid-like structure on the shape. So adding that SDF smooth and kind of upping this percentage value will take that away. So that's kind of nice. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is actually pull in a random field, or a shader field, excuse me, because we know that we're going to be creating sponge. And even though we can create a really fun material, the nice thing is we can pull a shader field in here to kind of also create some divots in the actual mesh itself. So it looks a little bit more sponge-like even without a material applied. So I'm going to grab the shader field, and nothing will happen by default because we need to actually add a shader. So if you see, there's the shader tab with a little drop-down arrow, and we can go right in there and choose noise. And again, we don't have this in our volume builder yet, so it also won't affect anything. But if we now drag this into our volume builder, we can drag it above smooth because we'll add another layer. We can actually start changing this voxel size, and we should kind of see a change. So if I set it to 1, actually, we also need to change, there's this creation space in the shader field. We need to set this to objects below. And let's go back to our noise here and maybe scale this up. And I also want to go scroll down a little bit on my screen and see this contrast option. I want to take this all the way up to 100. And I also want to go back. So that took a second to kind of process, but you can see now that noise is really showing up on our shape. So we could also go in here, and if I start changing this surface threshold value to a little bit lower, that should also kind of affect it differently. I think it's also going to run a little bit slow just with this set to 1 centimeter. So let me try changing it to 2. And you can see we've got something interesting going on here, but these edges are a little bit harsh. So I'm actually going to add another SDF smooth layer, and I don't want it to be too smooth. So I'm going to lower this a little, maybe to 30%. And if the noise is still too intense, we can go back to our shader field and we can take down that contrast a little bit maybe. So just to a point that you like. And also we could change our noise type. So it's set to noise right now. I think that one works for a lot of scenarios, but you get more of a smooth result in your noise. So I like FBM a lot. That one's fun and gives a little bit more kind of a chunky noise texture instead of something soft and smooth. So I think this is kind of an interesting shape. Maybe our toruses are a little thin. So if you wanted, you could also add what is called the SDF dilate and erode to the volume builder. And that will kind of obviously thicken this shape itself. So you can feel free to play around with that. Maybe I want to take this up like this much. So if we now hit N and B on our keyboard, we can see we have a really dense mesh. And I don't want it to be that dense because we're going to also be simulating this object for the soft body tag. So I'm going to go and add a remesh, and I'm going to drag our volume mesher into that. And I'm also going to set our remesh to maybe only like 20%, and adaptiveness we can drag all the way down. And this may take a second to calculate, so bear with me here. But once that's done, we'll see a much nicer mesh density. So this is nice. We can honestly even probably take this down a little bit more, maybe to like 15%. It's totally up to you and how dense you're going to work with and how much or how beefy your machine is. Like if you know you can work with something intense as far as the polygons go, then you're probably fine. But let's just say that is an amount that we're happy with and we would like to try working with. So I'm just going to right click on our remesh and I'm going to go to connect objects and delete. And now we have a single solid object that we can rename to sponge. So I'm just going to do that. And now we can focus on the simulation side of things. So I'm going to add in a plane, and this will act as our floor. And you can see that our sponge object is pretty large right now. So I'm actually going to scale this down by pressing T on my keyboard and just dragging that down and pulling that above my floor. And I'm going to hit an A on my keyboard again and kind of zoom in here. And maybe I'll rotate my object to just be facing this way. And we can now add a collide tag to our ground, our plane object. And we are then going to add the soft body tag in simulation tags to our sponge. So we can just do that right now. And you can see that it adds all these little poles inside of the object. And this is going to calculate where it's kind of hitting the collider. And one thing to note is that we have these kind of pieces in our mesh that kind of hang off of the object. The torus pieces here will probably have some more movement than the rest of the object that's a little bit more solid. So if we were to just play this right now, it might take a second to kind of calculate here, but you can see that this is almost a little bit too cloth-like and not exactly the kind of spongy, more rubbery response that we want. So there's a couple things that I found that have helped. And if we go into the soft body tab here, we have all these options that we can kind of control. So one thing that I know has really helped me in my own simulations is changing the shoot and hit side that we have down here from back to both. And you'll notice when we do that, if I go back to the back tabs, you're going to see we don't have any connections in the gaps between where the torus is. But if we change that to both, we now have these lines that kind of connect the spots that are hanging off of the mesh. So almost like creating a bridge, and it will just keep that structure a little bit more. I've also found that you can add some more poles per point. So this will just double that amount there. And then finally, I found that taking the softness value down will also really help. So instead of 100, I might even take this to 1. And let's take a look at how we're getting our simulation now. So this is much more stiff. We've still got some movement. So if you wanted to keep playing around with that, you could add some more poles, go in here. We could take our softness back down to like 0.01 even and see if that helps. It's totally up to you. And also one more thing I think I forgot to mention is that sometimes changing the spread can help. So playing around here, you could get some better results depending on that value. So, okay, let's take a look. I think that looks nice. We're getting definitely a more rubbery response than kind of a melty cloth response. So I'm just going to quickly cache this. Should be really fast. And then we are good to start moving on to our materials. So, all right, we have that cache. So now we can kind of scrub through in here. So let's just say that I wanted to work with frame 30 here. I'm going to add in my camera and dome lights, so I know as I build my material that I can kind of get an accurate look at the lighting as well. So I'm going to go into my camera object and set this to 120 for the focal length. Then I'm just going to zoom out here a little and kind of frame this differently. And I might also add a plane to go in the background, kind of behind our object here. So I'm going to set that to Z-axis and just pull this back. So now we can add our dome light. So let's go into the asset browser and back to the HDRIs tab. And I really love using this 2-light setup option. I use it all the time. It just works for so many different situations. So I'm going to pull in that one. And this is where we could pull in our Redshift render view and take a look. So let's see how this looks at this moment. So right now it looks like this. It's pretty dark, and part of that is just because of the rotation of the dome light. So this is where we can click on our dome light and just go to coordinates and start rotating that to a spot that we're happy with. So maybe something like that. I like how it's casting some nice shadows on half the object, but we're still getting a lot of light hitting where those divots are in the mesh. So I think that's probably a good spot. We're at 73 degrees. And now we can create our procedural materials. So I'm just going to start by creating only one material. We're going to call this sponge main, and we can drag this right onto our sponge mesh. So the first thing I know I want to change just here without diving into the node editor is going to be the roughness, because sponges are pretty rough unless you're like using water with them. So by default, I'm just going to keep this at a pretty high value, somewhere around 0.8. We can even set that to exactly 0.8. And now we can dive into the node editor itself. So I'm going to bring this window over and kind of resize it. I still want to be able to see our object, but I want to have our node editor pretty much in view. I'm also going to hide just the material pane for now. So the way I am going to just describe here quickly, creating the sponge material, mainly we're going to use the color layer node. So we can just add that first. So if I type layer, we can get this color layer. And if you've never used this node, it may look intimidating because it's got a lot of inputs, but I promise you, if you've ever used like Photoshop, think of this node like Photoshop. It's basically just a way to layer different materials or textures like you would in Photoshop. You have options for just like a canvas color. You could use a mask, which all of these have this mask node input, and this takes any black and white mask. So just like in Photoshop where you can create like alpha masks, you can do that in here. And likewise, we have a bunch of layer options in the color layer node. So we have up to 7 layers that we can use. And these are hierarchical. So if I were to add purple polka dots to layer 2, and then a ramp to layer 3, the ramp is going to overlap the polka dots on top. So the other thing to just keep in mind when using this node is that things will stack on top of each other depending on how far down the list you go. So, okay, we're going to use the color layer node, and I'm going to just call this node surface sponge mask, because I'm going to keep everything in here just black and white. I'm not actually going to use this to drive the color. I just want to use this to create the surface. So the way we're going to do that, yes.
Sorry, just really, really quick. We've had a quick question / statement in, and it was from I am saying, it would be nice if the color layer had opacity for each layer. And it does. I was wondering if you could show that real quick.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So yeah, this mask slider that's actually in the layers also will control that opacity. So if we, I mean, maybe I can just even test this out right here. If I just pull in a Maxon noise, I can kind of experiment to show you. If I were to pull this into the color of this layer 1, which is just enabled by default, and if we solo the color layer, you're going to see that we have that noise showing up. But if I start to lower that mask value, we're going to just see the base color. So anytime you plug in something into one of these layers, you're going to get a mask value that you can then control with this slider here. And you can also play with blending modes. So just like Photoshop, we have all these options for blend modes that are the same as the ones you see in programs like Photoshop or other photo editors. So, you know, all these ones. So these can definitely come into play. But yeah, that's how you would control kind of the opacities with this mask.
Perfect.
Value.
Thank you. I think, sometimes, because obviously it's named mask, which does make like logical sense. But I think sometimes we're used to like the term opacity from Photoshop. I think we look for opacity, but yes.
Yep, very true. And I guess maybe it comes into play with like, that anything used in a mask is going to be black or white, and anything white will be totally visible and anything black will be invisible. So like when you have that mask on, you're basically saying the mask is working and it's that white value is controlling the visibility, but if I turn that off, it's going to become invisible and everything's hidden. So anyway, we need to build the surface of our sponge. I'm going to set this base layer back to like a white or a black color, and I'm going to just disable layer 1 for now. And it's good we actually pulled in a Maxon noise, because that is what I was going to say after we needed to pull in. So we're going to pull in a Maxon noise, and we are just going to actually control drag a couple of copies of that same noise. So we are going to use these 3 to craft the surface of our sponge. And I'm going to rename these because they will each be different kinds of pores or dots on the surface of our sponge. So this first one will be small dots, or you could call them pores. This next one will be medium dots. And then the third one will be large dots. And actually all 3 of these noises are going to be the same type. So I'm going to highlight them all. And instead of leaving them at the noise type, I'm going to change this to displace, or actually it's displace for noise, but I cannot see it in my pop-up here. So I might choose, maybe I can.
So I think is it like lower in the screen?
Yes.
So if you click turbulence, you should be able to go down on the arrow to get to displace turbulence, to get to displace for annoy, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm clicking on the little
so if you click on like the lowest one you can reach.
Okay.
And then press your down arrow.
Oh, and it will just switch. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Not ideal, but I've made you enlarge your screen for the stream.
All good. I figured that we might have like some of the pop-ups like that. I just have to learn how to navigate that through the different screen size. So no problem at all. I'm glad we figured that out. So you're going to want displace for annoy. And actually this last one, or maybe it wasn't, hold on. Let me see. I don't know. This last one looks kind of like a cell shaded thing. It might not be. No, it was displace for annoy. Okay, that was just a mishap with a little preview there. So they should all be the same kind of noise. And we're just going to first play with the scale of each and then also increase the contrast. So for this first one, if we solo this first small dots noise that we've created, this size is much too large. We definitely want this to be really small because I want this to be the like tiniest pores in the sponge material itself that is almost not something you really notice unless you're really close or like seeing a macro shot. So we could set this to somewhere like 5 maybe. And I think that's a nice size, or even 1. It just depends on what you're going for in your scene, but this almost becomes invisible. So maybe we could do a little in between and go for 3 for that value. And I also mentioned wanting to increase the contrast. So we have options in this output tab to enhance things like cycles, low clip and high clip, and then brightness and contrast. So if I start increasing this, we're going to darken all those little tiny dots, which is what I would like to have happen here. Okay, so we've got kind of the base for our surface here, and we can plug this first small dots layer right into the color for layer 1. So now if we solo our color layer and we enable layer 1 and we turn this mask back up, we should now see that noise is just the exact same thing because that's all we've plugged in for right now. It's just in layer 1 for our color layer node. So now we can focus on the medium dots for layer 2. So the medium dots, I don't want to be as small, but I still want to keep this at a fairly decent size. So maybe we could try 20, something like that could be interesting. And I also want to increase the contrast here. And I'm just adding these 3 layers because I really want to increase the variety of sizes of the pores, because a lot of sponges do have that. They have some holes that have kind of broken into each other or just kind of pulled apart, or you've just got a little bit of variety here and there to create that realism. And I've also sometimes played with some of the values at the top in the general section in Maxon noises. So I found that playing with exponent can be really interesting. The more you drag this to the right, these almost start to look kind of square. And the more you drag them to the left, they kind of turn invisible. So this is also a nice way to kind of create some subtle variety in the shape of the little pores or dots themselves, but still overall we can control the size with this overall scale. So like we could do 30, or 20, somewhere around that value we originally chose, and play with these values up here to really affect that shape and just the intensity of those dots as well. So let me lower that a little, maybe something like right there works. And we can also play with octaves. So I found that if I take this all the way to the left to 0, you can see we've got some really smoothed circles here. But the more I take this to the right, we get kind of fuzzy, broken up, noisy dots. So that's also something just to keep in mind, that if you want something more smooth, you can drag this all the way over. And so I do think we want something fairly soft. So I'll keep it at 1.44. And now we can drag this medium dots noise into our layer 2. And if we now solo the color layer node, we don't have it enabled, so we need to make sure we turn that checkbox on for layer 2. And we also need to turn this mask up. But again, you see that this is just now overpowering everything. It's the only thing we're seeing. So this is where I like to play with the blending modes. So if we use something like multiply, it's going to project that dark value from the medium dots onto the same values we see below with the tiny dots that we made. So now we've got a nice mix of all of those different pores that we've created. And then finally, we can focus on the large dots. So these are just going to be the really big, like occasional dot that's kind of a piece maybe of the sponge broken off. So I want these to be the largest but least amount. So maybe we want this scale to be like 50, because this is going to be the biggest one. And then contrast again, we want to bring this pretty much all the way up. So this one we can also play with the exponent value, because I don't want as many of these. So taking this value kind of low is important here. And again, playing with octaves to kind of smooth these out or increase the fuzziness is totally up to you. So maybe I want these a little bit more fuzzy. And once we're happy with that, we can drag this one then over our color layer, because as you can see, we don't have a layer 3 showing up here. We just have 2 layers visible by default. But what you can just do is hover your little line over the color layer and navigate to layer 3 color. And now we will see that showing up here. So there's 7 options in one color layer node. But you can also continue to add to this by just plugging this color layer into like another color layer node if you wanted to keep building this up. That's kind of the beauty of the color layer node and just the node editor and the freedom you have there. But okay, we just plugged our large dots in, so we need to enable that in color 3. And let's solo our color layer now. And again, this one's overpowering the others because it's set to normal mode. So we need to change this to multiply. So I also think all of these are the same seed right now, so we might have some noises in the same spot. So let me just go and adjust the seed values for the medium and large dots, so they're a little bit different. So now you can see we've got our large dots, our medium dots, and small dots all kind of as a mixture here on the surface of our mesh. And I might even increase the large dots a little bit more. I want those to really stand out as separate from the medium ones. And then I might take the medium ones down to 15. I just want to emphasize that distinction there. So, okay, this is the surface that we want to work with for our displacement. So again, I'm keeping this black and white. I'm not creating a color yet. I'm actually just going to use this as the height map for our displacement. So we can double click in our node editor and search for displacement. We can grab that. And this purple out can just go right into the displacement value in the output of our main surface. So right there. And then we can drag our out color from the color layer node right into displacement. And now if we unsolo that, you can see right away we've got an interesting texture going on. So it looks almost corally or something. And it's not going to look like sponge yet, but I want to show you kind of where some of the magic comes into play, which is once we add color. So if I grab a ramp node and I then plug our sponge height map here from the color layer in there, and let's just choose maybe a color we want for our sponge. I like to just stick to 2 colors, one for the kind of pitted areas and one for the brighter, more extruded parts of the sponge. So I'm going to keep this first value pretty dark. Maybe we'll do it like an orangey color. And then I'm going to go to kind of a light orange for this part. So then let's plug that into color. And I think we need to emphasize this a little bit more. So let me make this value darker, maybe more of a red, and maybe make this a little bit lighter. So something like this, now you can see it's not perfect yet, but we've got some really interesting results where the pits in the sponge surface really are standing out here using that ramp. So the other thing that will help it even further is by plugging this into a subsurface color value. So I can drag that same ramp over my Redshift standard material. locate subsurface color. And then it won't do anything by default because we need to turn some of that subsurface on. So locate the subsurface tab in your Redshift standard material, and we're going to drag this weight up. And I'm going to set this maybe around halfway. Or we'll do 1 just to start to really emphasize that. But that will just add some kind of softness and let light pass through the surface a little bit, which we would have in a sponge. So it's hard to see maybe because of the fuzziness here as it's loading, and it will be heavier on your system to kind of process, but light is kind of poking through the surface. So I might even scale this down a little. This scale value will control like how close to the surface of your mesh this light value and this color is going to kind of push through the surface. If that's kind of not really describing that correctly, but if you had like a really thick mesh, you could really control like how far down this white color is kind of going to penetrate the mesh density itself. So I'm going to keep this maybe at like halfway and around 0.4 for the scale. And for now, I think that's good. Maybe we want to actually change the brightness of this red again. I think it was a little bit too dark, and maybe I want something a little bit more yellow for that bright color. Or maybe, you know what, I'm gonna be crazy and do blue instead of red. Maybe that could be fun. So something like that, some kind of light blue color. Looks almost like moldy or something. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so we've got our main procedural sponge, excuse me. And I actually have a tutorial on my personal channel where I go through how you would then connect these values to the group node so that you can edit these attributes like in the right-hand side. So if that's interesting, feel free to watch that after this. But for now, we've created our procedural sponge that we can then work with. And you can always come in here and change the scales or the seeds just to get something totally unique. But we are just going to call that the main surface of the sponge for now. And we're actually going to duplicate the sponge material by holding Control and dragging. And we're going to call the second one sponge 2. You could also call it like hair sponge or something, because we're actually going to be creating the second sponge color, and that is where hair is going to get scattered. So to actually separate the areas where we're going to scatter hair from this main sponge material, we are going to dive into adding a vertex map to our sponge. So I'm going to highlight our sponge and right click, and I'm going to go to other tags and then search for vertex map and add that here. And we need to click the vertex map icon again to see this little menu here, and we can check use transfer, and that will give us this fields tab. And we can delete freeze because we don't really need to worry about that. But what you're going to search for in the linear field section is actually for the shader field. So it's right here. We can add that. Nothing will happen again by default. We need to add noise. So I'm going to add a noise here, and you can see that it's pretty soft on the surface of our mesh. And if we hit NB in our keyboard, and let's go out of our camera view just for right now and kind of zoom in, you can see that some of these areas are not going to even cover a full polygon. So let me just increase the contrast on our noise. If I really increase this all the way, you're going to see this in effect. So like we have some spots where the noise just doesn't even cover a full polygon. So if it was trying to determine a selection from that, it would just create a spot. It would just be hard to determine small details. So that's why we want to have a kind of a large noise in this shader field so that it doesn't have as much trouble selecting areas. It won't do well with trying to do small details because we have a fairly low density mesh. So I'm going to hit NA on our keyboard again, or actually I want to keep it at NB for right now just so we can figure out the scale that we want. And let me just go into the scale of our noise and start increasing this. So maybe something here could be fine. So I'm at like 210, somewhere around there. And now I'm going to hit NA on my keyboard. And maybe I'll take the contrast down just slightly. So something like that. So this is kind of another magical thing that I didn't realize I could do before. And then doing this kind of tutorial helped me figure that out. But if we go back to our sponge and other tags, and if we add the polygon selection, it will jump to the start of our simulation. But what we can do is we can check this use transfer box in the polygon selection tag. And we can actually, let's delete our freeze for the moment. We can just drag our vertex map in here. And it won't do anything right away. We have to click off of that polygon selection. But if we double click, it will make the selection that our noise was like projecting onto our mesh. And actually it might be the inversion of that. So we might need to find the invert if I can. I might have trouble with that though. Hold on. let me see here. I might not be able to add invert, but just know that you could add invert and it will flip that around. So if like you have a noise here in your vertex map and you put that into your polygon selection tag, you can invert it and it will select the right area. So right now it's kind of doing the inverse of what our noise is showing. But basically this means that we have this noise and we could change the noise seed at any time and go back here and update our polygon selection and it will change to that correct noise. But to keep this specific selection, I do want to add freeze. So I might have trouble here with this too because of just because of the little pop-up menu not showing with the resize. But I'll go back and add the polygon selection tag and because it has this freeze in there by default. So let me do that again.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if you pull up like the attributes window.
Oh, well, yeah, that could be
more of the, possibly. That's a guess.
No, you're probably onto something there. Let me just I'll uncheck this freeze for now and just pull our vertex map in. Let me try that again. So there we go. Yes, Ellie, you are a genius. Thank you.
You can tell that I have my screen at 1080p for live streaming a lot, can't you?
Oh man, there's stuff like that where you think I should just think of that by default, but I appreciate your incredible knowledge there. Thank you. So yeah, so we could just pull the freeze back in that way. We want to make sure that we do have freeze in there once we're happy with our noise selection here, because we have a simulated object. So if I go to the start, I want to make sure that that polygon selection stays the same as it moves, because the noise that's in the vertex map is kind of a noise in 3D space, and it will change the selection if you don't freeze it over time. So again, we have that frozen. So now it will be consistent throughout our animation. And I think we were at frame 30 before. Okay, so we now have this polygon selection tag, which is nice because we can go into our layers panel and we can right click on our sponge 2 material, the copy of the first one that we made, and we can hit apply. And it will apply that material to our new polygon selection. So now we can dive into that second material and change the color. So I'm going to just change our ramp. Maybe we want kind of a red. Let's see here. Kind of an intense red color. Oh wait, I think we need to flip that around. Okay, so let's just try that. Let's see what that's like. We can hit play on our view. So now you can see wherever that noise from the vertex map was and our polygon selection tag is, it is applying that copied noise, or that copied sponge material. So I might actually tweak the material again because it's a little bit not exactly what I'm going for. So I think I want this one to be brighter, maybe slightly more orange. Something like this maybe. Yeah, I think that's cool. Okay, so we have our sponges set up, but now we need to actually add some hair. So let me actually just quickly save my scene because this is a spot where I think I encountered a crash once before. So I'm just going to quickly save. I don't know if there are any like questions or anything, Ellie, while I save, but
yeah, there was actually a couple. So I've been answering a few in the chat, but Vaughn was wondering, so all the way back when you created the volume builder material, you know, you break it down and you make a single object, right? So he was wondering, do you ever save the kind of the procedural version, the non-connected version, when you combine the objects, in case you want to go back and you know, disconnect some of those bits later? Do you ever save an original?
Yeah, usually what I tend to do in my own personal scenes, like when I'm creating, is I'll create like a null and I'll just call this like archive. And I would typically just make this so it's not visible in either the viewport or render. And then I would just drag that like remesh into there and create like the combined baked down like sponge shape as a copy of that. So I can always go back and change it as needed. You might be able to use the connect object or modifier in here with the like remesh inside of that, and maybe that could work for applying the vertex map and the polygon selection tag. So that could be a route to explore as well. I just personally went the route of combining those, but I think you could still keep that fully procedural if you wanted to just kind of build up with the materials on top of that. So yeah, okay, so I've got it saved, so we should be good in case we experience any craziness. But I'm going to go right up to the simulate tab, and we can go to hair objects and click add hair. And it won't do anything by default because we haven't added it to anything. But we can go to this guides tab and we can actually pull in a polygon selection to this link. So if we just pull in our polygon selection, you're going to see some craziness happen. And that's because we've got a ton of guides and a lot of length. So I think we can actually turn the amount of guides down to maybe like 1,000. And I'm going to change this length down maybe to like 5 or 6. Or maybe even, yeah, we'll do 6. And then it's important to note that with the hair system, you have guides and you have hairs. So the guides are just informing the hair of where to be placed in the render and like how to simulate them. And the hairs are going to be the actual fully rendered hairs in the scene. So you want more segments and more hair on the actual hairs tab than the guides. You don't want to have a million guides. It will probably just slow down your scene. But we could up our segments here maybe to like 12 or 15 for these guides. And then for the hairs, maybe I'll change the segments to like 50. Also, we are on frame 30, and by default, the hairs have dynamics enabled and forces at play here, and I don't want that for my particular scene. Because if you think of like things that have kind of fuzz on them, especially like short fuzz, short hair, it doesn't always move a lot unless you're like blowing on it or something, like a stuffed animal. Probably the fur won't move around much unless you're like physically interacting with it. So I'm going to turn off dynamics because I don't need that. And I'm also going to change the gravity to 0 just to start because I don't want any forces affecting this. And I think if we left this at frame 30 and tried to render, those hairs would probably be like have fallen down. So let's actually go back to the first frame. And you're going to notice that sometimes you get the hair sticking in place and not moving with the object unless you kind of click again. And just to ensure that things go back to the spot that I want them, there's this tab in the guide section called editing. And if you hit regrow and reroute, it will just ensure that the hairs get put in the right place. So I'm going to play through this now and go back to kind of the frame that we would like. So I'm going to try to aim for 30. So 31 works for me. And you could also cache your hair. So in the, I think it's, we just have our cache tab. So you could cache this. This is also where it's really important to have the freeze on your polygon selection tag because our hair is being driven by that polygon selection. So if you have something that's constantly changing, your hair is going to get really messed up. So make sure that you have freeze in your polygon selection tag. But okay, we can actually start viewing our hair here. So I'm going to hit play on our render view. And you're going to see something pretty crazy show up. This hair is going to almost look like some funny sea creature, like a sea anemone or something. We've got very triangular hairs, and they're very wide and not exactly hair-like right now. And I actually made a chart just to show you a comparison of a bunch of values when playing with the hair system. So maybe let me drag this to the side as well so that if our faces are covering it, you guys can see this. But feel free to pause if you need to come back to these values later. But I played around with different thickness, frizz, clumping, bend, kink, wave, and stray fraction values with the hair. And this will just give you maybe a good idea of what all these different values do to hair and where they're important. So the first thing I'm going to be changing is actually the thickness of our hairs because we don't want these so triangular. So I can start changing things by double clicking on the hair material. And we have this thickness tab, and by default it's set to 1 centimeter and 0.1 for the tip of the hair. So I'm going to actually change this to 0.03 and maybe 0.01. And that will change the hairs and look much better already. So it's going to take a second. It actually will become pretty much not invisible, but it will take a second to see just because of the fuzziness of the render view. But you can see we still see those, and maybe I'll set it to 0.05, just hopefully that's easier for you guys to kind of see in the scene. So let's give that a second. And then the other thing I'm just going to change right away is the color because it's set to kind of a brown muted tone to start, and we want this to kind of match our orange sponge section. So I'm going to, or red maybe. So I'm going to set this to kind of a red tone for the roots, and this slider on the right will represent the tips of the hair. So I want this also to be kind of an orangey color, something like this. And that should hopefully give our hairs a little bit more color to them, which it does. But there are also a bunch of things that I showed in that chart that we want to kind of play with. So we have all these checkboxes in the basic tab of the hair material, things for all of these. I didn't cover all of them in that chart, but they're definitely worth playing around with. The ones that I tend to use in my scenes are kink and clump, and frizz, and sometimes length as well. And length is one that's kind of interesting. This will add a variety of lengths to your hair. So right now they're all set to the same length. This one will say for 20% of the hairs, we're going to mix up that variation, that size of the hair length. So sometimes that's just nice for realism because we don't all have hairs that are exactly the same length. So that's kind of nice to play with. The other one that you may notice really taking an effect here is the clumping. So that's kind of creating these mountainous looking peaks of hair. So I find that 10% is sometimes much too high. So I try to stick around even 3 or 5%, somewhere around there, just so I get some slight clumping. And then the radius value is also really determining how far it's going to search for hairs to kind of group together. So I like to keep this maybe around 10 or even less than that. And then the variation is where I increase this value. So to give it some more variety, I'll set that to 50. And then I'm also going to go in and I think increase the kink to maybe 40%. And then for the frizz, I'm going to increase that to 20%. And these are all just kind of personal playing around values. You can totally get something super different every time by trying different ones out. Here's another just little image as a reference for just a variety of things you can do with the hair. So definitely play around with that to explore all the stuff here in the basic material. But the real magic I have found with using the hair system is actually by adding another material on top of the hair. And maybe not everybody knows this, but if you add the principled Redshift hair material on top, you have a lot more options to create some realism. So if we click on our Redshift material, we see we have these options open and the color will change right away. And that's just because it's not referencing our albedo at all that we made from the original hair material. So we can just drag this up and it will now use the color from our first hair material. So we're right back to kind of our orangey red, but it's a little bit more vibrant now. And we can also increase how they kind of stand out by playing with this roughness value for roughness and roughness radial in the Redshift principled hair. So I like to take these up pretty high, both of these, and you're going to notice that helps them stand out even more, make them almost seem like fluffier, maybe a little bit more volume there, and they stand out. They're much more vibrant. So I think adding this on top has been key for making the hairs in my scenes look really realistic. And then another thing that is important to note that I had here in the hair chart is this bottom one for stray fractions. So this is actually not from the original material. This is in this Redshift principled material. And this is down here. This controls how many of your hairs are going to have the stray hair color that you give it. So it's this slider here. If I set this to all the way to 1, all of the hairs are going to turn orange. But if I set it to like halfway, half of the hairs will be orange, or, so on. You can control this value here. But this is just a fun way to create some extra variation in your hair colors and also some realism because all of our hair probably isn't just exactly one color. So you can always go in and change this value to like something completely different and just totally play around and craft a really unique look for your hair. But yeah, that is kind of how you add the stray hairs and just add some extra magic to the hair in your scene by duplicating the materials on the hair object and adding the second Redshift hair material. Highly recommend for any hair in your scene. But yeah, if you also want to know how to add further realism, if we go back to the hairs tab in our hair object, it's set to 50,000 by default, which I think looks really great. Like I think this is a perfect amount here. But let's say if you're creating a hairline on the character, sometimes you don't want such a grid-like placement of hairs. And I found, let me take this overall number down to like 15,000 just for performance-wise right now. I found that playing with this cloning option here will help add some realism because we have this ability to offset the roots and the tips of the hair. So I can clone the 15,000 amount by 1 or 2, however many I want, and it will add more clones, but it's going to offset those hair right now by 5 centimeters. So maybe I'll actually change this to 1, and that still might be too high. You may notice hair is kind of floating in your scene if this number is too high. So I like to keep it 1 or under, but this is just a nice way to kind of offset everything just a little bit so it's not so rigid and grid-like. But yeah, maybe I'll turn this off and just turn our 50,000 number back on, just so I have that density of fur or fuzz. And then I think one of the final things I'm going to do here is add a light to behind our object, just so these hairs and the sponge really stand out. And then maybe we'll add a little bit more subsurface. So I'm going to just pause our IPR for now and save again to be safe. And then I'm going to pull in an area light and scale this down a little and pull this up and behind our sponge, kind of to the side. And then I'm going to rotate this so that it kind of reflects across the edges of our sponge here. So maybe something like that, and we can hit play again. Also, if you're increasing slowness with the hair, sometimes it just helps to disable it just for the time being if you're like visualizing your lights. So I'm going to disable it for the moment. Click on my area light. I think that's pretty, it's nice, but it's a little bit intense. So I'm going to take the spread down first, maybe around 0.3 or even 0.2. And then I'm going to take the intensity far down as well, maybe to around 8 or something. And now we can re-enable our hair. And I think these are just going to also really stand out with our sponge surface. So yeah, you can see they really pick up the light, which looks really fun. And I think maybe our light's still too intense. So maybe you want to take the spread down a little bit and the intensity down. And yeah, maybe something like that's kind of nice. So this is all up to you, and keep playing around. Oh, and one final thing that I'll just say here is that, let me disable our light just so I can see our viewport again. And I'm actually going to disable our hair as well for the time being. So we added displacement to our sponge with that sponge surface mask that we created. And this gets you really far already. So you can see we've already got a nice sponge surface. But right now it's displacing the geometry just up or down on the shell of our geometry. We only have just kind of one layer. There's no thickness there. So something that I found has added some realism also is by dropping in a thicken and then dragging your sponge into that. Let me also change the size maybe to like 1 centimeter or even 0.5 centimeters. And I'm going to drag my sponge into that. And I'm also going to create a subdivision surface, or I probably won't enable this for right now, but I would drag that into a subdivision surface as well. And that will just add some nice extra depth to your object. So you can play with this value to your liking. I've just found that that kind of helps, especially with a subsurface scattering. It's got more thickness to work with for scattering light. And you could even go in here to the displacement node. And instead of having this range be 0 to 1, so whatever is dark is just going to stay on the surface at 0. And then whatever is bright in your displacement height map is going to get pushed outward to a value of 1. I actually found that it helps to change this to minus 0.5 and 0.5. So it's moving inward into the surface a little bit and then also pushing outward just a little bit. So I think that just can add a nice touch to your surface. And again, the nice thing about thicken is you can kind of play with how like intense you want that to be, how thick you want your sponge to look. And yeah, then we can just re-enable our hair. So I think that kind of covers it. And again, we could always go back and change our vertex map noise for the scattering and separate material. And we could change the seed and make sure we like regrow and reroot our hair, but it should just like switch to that new selection. So I actually might try that a second just to test. So let's go in and change the seed of our noise here for our second material. Let's click off and double click our mesh. And oh, and we also need to delete that freeze because that is going to affect it. So let's click off and double click our mesh, and it will now have that new selection for the noise, or it should. It might be messed up because I switched that and still had the freeze on there. Let's just try switching this again, and then double clicking on our shape and adding that freeze back in. And then we need to regrow and reroot our hair and make sure it's visible. And it should now take over that new selection. So it's going to take a second. But yeah, now it will be in that new spot where the noise has been switched to. So that's kind of the nice thing about doing this approach with the vertex map and the polygon selection is if you kind of like the materials you're working with, but you want them in a different spot, you can change that seed on the noise at any time. And you've got a new pattern going for your sponge and hair. So pretty fun. I hope that helps. But yeah, that's kind of the scene. That's all I've got for the sponge stuff, and hopefully you guys can create some really fun abstract forms and things. But yeah, is there any questions?
There are a couple. Yeah, this is so cool. Like, honestly, me and Jess were chatting just before we kind of went live, and I was saying that I've not really played around too much with hair. And yeah, after seeing this, I'm going to have to now, really, aren't I?
You'll have to play around. It's so much fun.
I mean, it looks incredible as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, it does. It looks great. And a few comments were sort of saying about you doubling up those materials, like putting the normal hair material and the principled hair material.
Yeah.
Is something that, I mean, for me, that was a brand new thing that I've ever seen. And you're absolutely right. It made it added that extra little layer to it.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. No, it's great.
I love that because I think I learned that from someone else watching a tutorial once, and it's just kind of like, it's funny sometimes the little tips and tricks you pick up that you never would have like expected to try, and yet they add so much. So
and it's almost like, I love like when people like break the rules.
Yeah,
you probably wouldn't normally apply those materials, or you'd probably think, oh, I don't think they're really made to probably be layered up together, but actually it works and it looks really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that element of play and just like experimenting, even if you mess up or fail or like something crashes, like you learn so much through those times, like just playing around and experimenting with doubling materials or, you know, trying some new kind of value or whatever. So yeah, I think just having that mindset of just playing around and not constricting yourself too much can be super helpful for learning and growing. But yeah, I might switch over now.
Actually, feel free to switch over.
Okay.
I'll put our faces on. So yeah, you're safe to go.
Okay.
There's a couple of little questions actually. So one from Victor. They're wondering what kind of are your PC specs?
Oh yes. So oh boy, off the top of my head, I might not know, but maybe I can pull this up actually. Let me
Always a common question in these streams.
Yeah. I mean, I know off the bat that I have two NVIDIA 3060 Ti graphics cards that I think are 8 gigabytes each. So I think that's kind of the main one that a lot of people like to know. Let me see. See, I had an old coworker who once helped me build my PC. So I was not like the genius behind picking all the parts, but okay, I have also an AMD Ryzen 5 5600X 6-core processor. And yeah, like 15.95 gigabytes of RAM. So hopefully that helps. There's probably more things. I have it listed on one of my recent YouTube videos in a comment. So like the full list of things. But I can definitely go back to that at some point. I need to like write this down and put it on a sticky note right in front of my computer so I can always reference that.
Yeah, it's a very common question we get during these streams. I think a lot of people love to know the kind of tech that we're using as well.
Totally.
There was another question from Artificial. I love this question, by the way.
Ooh.
Jess's techniques are pretty technical. Does she ever forget how she did something? Do you ever go back and watch your own tutorials, or do you keep like a notebook?
I love that comment. And I definitely have gone back before. I have watched a tutorial before of my own. So yes, but most often I just go back to like the people I've learned from and watch things or like Google stuff. And sometimes I look for like those documentation pages on Maxon because there's a lot to learn there. But yeah, sometimes it's just going back to the live streams too. I practiced a lot of recording myself doing these live streams also. So some of this stuff is like very like familiar because I've been doing it enough of like just the practicing beforehand. But there are definitely days where I have to like refigure out how a certain tool works or a node or something. And I just go to YouTube. It's always handy. It's got everything I need.
Absolutely. I have no shame in admitting that I have researched on YouTube a technique and then I've seen one of my own tutorials. I'm like, I don't remember how to do this. And yeah, no shame.
Absolutely.
I fully my own tutorials.
Yeah. Hey, I've got like short form memory loss some of the time, I feel like. So, you know, it's just an opportunity for me to relearn and it's fantastic. So why not?
Cool. There's another question from Artificial. Curious what your day job is, because I know in the last stream or the stream before we talked about that you kind of do this in your free time, in your spare time, because you enjoy it so much.
Yes. So I am a creative director at a tech company called Wedge, and we actually do video interviewing software. And so most of the work that I do there is creative, but it tends to be more like social media content creation or website like work or just visuals or like videos, even recording that I'm doing for our place. So yeah, tech company, video interviewing software. Yeah, fun stuff. But I don't typically use 3D for that. So I think that partly keeps me inspired to create also outside of work, because it's like a fresh thing that I haven't gotten to dive into during the day.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So it looks like those are kind of all the questions and comments. Obviously, I mean, you can proceed now. There's been lovely comments as always. I've really enjoyed these techniques. I also have enjoyed not only today's episode, but all three of them. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your techniques with us.
Oh, of course.
Some cool things.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellie. It's been such a blast. I hope we can do many more things together in the future, because it's been so fun.
Yes, well, I'm sure based on these comments as well, I think we'll have to. Also, one quick thing that I realized, unsurprisingly, that I forgot to mention is the project files are available.
Oh, yes.
And they're actually in the description of the video. So I shared them in the chat, but for anyone who's watching this later on, then feel free. You have access to all the project files for all of this 3-part series. So yeah, feel free to download those. Yeah, Jess was kind enough to put some together. And then don't forget, you can rewatch the other episodes as well. So everything gets recorded and it's all on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. So yeah, you can definitely go back through this and learn some cool stuff.
Totally. Yes. I hope everybody has fun. Those scenes were fun to create, and I'm sure people are going to come up with some crazy, awesome things.
Absolutely. Well, Jess, for hopefully, not the last time, we'll say goodbye. But thank you so much for being a guest on the Creative Maxon. Yeah, honestly, for me, it's been a pleasure kind of being here, learning more about you and the work that you do.
Thank you, Ellie. It's such an honor. Again, I've learned so much from you, so it made my day to just get to do this with you.
Wow, I'm glad. But yeah, no, we'll definitely have to do it again soon, Maxon.
Yeah.
Listen to me.
Get it together. Maxon.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap this up then. Goodbye to everyone in the chat. Thank you for your questions, for your comments. Thank you for watching the recording and being part of these streams. And finally, thank you to Jess, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.